two systems has worked as in theory. That is, the planning system, the central planning system in the East has created some conditions so that the basic need more or less of all people have been met. But this did not mean any kind of economic democracy because, as I said before, the decisions were taken by the political elite. Nor the market system does satisfy the supposed advantage of freedom of choice, because it's ridiculous to talk about freedom of choice when basic needs have not been met. So the question is how we can have a system that on the one hand secures the satisfaction of all basic needs of all citizens, and on the other hand secures freedom of choice. For this, the proposal of the Inclusive Democracy Project is to combine the planning element, which would be especially useful as regards the meeting of basic needs, with the market element, not in the sense of a real market like the present one, but in the sense of an artificial market, and I'm going to explain it in a moment. As you can see in this simple diagram, at the bottom of the image you can see citizens decide, and there you can see that it is citizens who decide production, decide consumption, decide work. In other words, all important decisions are being taken by citizens. This is not accidental, because you should not forget that this is a model of the economy which is stateless. In other words, it does not presuppose a state. It's moneyless in the sense that it does not presuppose money in the sense that we know it today. And it is marketless in the sense that there is no real market but an artificial market, and it is basically citizens who decide. So let's move first to the consumption side of the economy. And there you can see that citizens decide as consumers how to allocate their income, which income comes in the form of vouchers. That is, citizens, in exchange for the work they offer to the society, they are rewarded with vouchers. Now, we may distinguish here between basic and non-basic vouchers. Let's start with basic vouchers on the right. We can estimate the number of man-hours that people have to offer to society, to the community, so that the basic needs are satisfied. The planners, in other words, on the basis of estimates about what are basic needs, and what are basic needs is decided democratically, not objectively, because if you introduce the element of objectivity, then you may easily end up with all sorts of arbitrary decisions. So democratically, citizens decide which needs are basic, and also which should be the level of satisfaction. What should be the level of satisfaction so that a basic need, say food or clothing or whatever, is satisfied. So, on the basis of the size of the population, estimates about the size of the population, and the entitlement of each citizen to a particular basic need, on the one hand, and on the other hand, on the basis of technological averages, we can find out what is the total number of basic hours that should be offered in a community of, say, 30 or 50,000 people, so that its basic needs are satisfied. The non-basic vouchers are issued to citizens who would like to work over and above the minimum requirement that is needed for the satisfaction of basic needs. Let's say that planners have estimated that everybody has to work 3 hours a day so that all basic needs are met. then if somebody wants to work more than 3 hours, either in the same line of activity or a different one, then is rewarded for this with non-basic vouchers we can use in buying goods and services which are of non-basic nature. The question that arises with respect to non-basic vouchers is how we can determine the rate of exchange, in other words, the prices in quotation marks at which work is exchanged with non-basic vouchers. For basic vouchers there is no problem because everybody has to work a minimum number of hours to meet his or her basic needs. But with non-basic vouchers there is a question of what is the rate of remuneration. Now, here we can take into account, and that's why I talked before about an artificial market, we can take into account the demand and supply conditions of the past. In other words, if, say, a mobile is characterized as a non-basic good by the assemblies, and if, say, over the past 6 months in this community there has been an offer of, say, 100,000 non-basic vouchers in the purchase of mobiles, and with these 100,000 vouchers people could buy 1,000 mobiles because that was the total production of mobiles, then if we divide over the number of vouchers used in the purchase of mobiles over the number of mobiles produced, we get 100. So the price of a mobile is 100 non-basic vouchers. And similarly we can find out the price of any other non-basic good. In other words, by taking into account what production took place over a period of time, and take into account also what the demand for this particular type of good and service was. This way, therefore, we start with actual demand and actual supply conditions rather than, and this is a major drawback of most planning systems, rather than by asking in advance people what they wish to buy and then calculate accordingly through the planning mechanism what to be produced. The disadvantage of all this type of planning is that people have to decide 6 months or a year in advance what exactly they're going to buy, which of course is something that seriously restricts freedom of choice. So let's move now to the production side of the economy. As you can see, citizens decide the production targets in demotic assemblies on the one hand and workplace assemblies on the other. Now, demotic assemblies are the most important, perhaps, body of decision making in the inclusive democracy. It is the assembly of the demos, the assembly of the citizen body in a particular area. A demotic assembly it takes decisions on all aspects of economic and political and social life, and as regards economics in particular, it decides on the basis of the plan which is designed at a confederal level, as I'm going to see in a moment. The demotic assembly, on the basis of the confederal plan instructions, which, as we have seen before, estimates what the basic needs would be of the people and how many hours each has to work. So on the basis of these instructions, the demotic assembly give instructions to the workplace assembly, the various workplaces and the workplace assemblies, of what the work tasks are, that is, what they have to produce in order to meet the needs of the people. However, both demotic and workplace assemblies refer to the local level. We have, however, to think that there are also problems of regional or even national or even continental significance and so on. That's why we need also what we may call regional assemblies, as you can see in the diagram, which decide on problems that cannot be decided at a local level, because in principle all main decisions are taken at a local level, but there are problems which cannot be solved at a local level. Take transport, take energy, take communication. You cannot solve these sort of problems at a local level, so there should be a regional assembly consisting of delegates from the demotic assemblies that not takes decisions. That's important. The regional assembly is an administrative council. It's not a policy-taking, policy-making body. You remember, we have delegates, we don't have representatives. So from demotic assemblies, a number of delegates are elected to the regional assembly in order to implement the decisions of the demotic assemblies. Finally, we have confederal assemblies, which are the highest organ of the economic organ of the inclusive democracy, and which means that an inclusive democracy cannot work only at a local level. Unless local democracies are confederated in a kind of a confederal inclusive democracy, then it is meaningless to talk about any reasonable allocation of resources. In fact, I could say that the three conditions of economic democracy are, first, what I mentioned before, the demotic ownership of the means of production. Second, it's self-reliance, that is, each local community, each local demos should be self-reliant, not in the sense of autarky. Autarky is impossible today, but in the sense of relying on its own resources in order to meet as many needs as possible. And the third important principle of, that is implied by this economic democracy model is confederal allocation of resources. The allocation of resources takes place at the confederal level. In a free society, the question is who is going to do the unpleasant jobs, and how we can meet demand and supply when, say, many more people would like to do jobs that are very pleasant and so on, versus the other type of job. Now, one solution that is being suggested is the idea of job complexes, which means that people can do a variety of work tasks. In other words, we can expand the meaning of the job or a type of job to include as many as possible work tasks. For example, if you work in an office,